Tell me a little bit about the traction you're seeing now that Volts is being adopted by different protocols and tokens. Where is the company heading to?
Yeah, so we launched on the 1st of June, so it's about 3 months ago now.
Yeah,
which actually
Congrats.
also coincided thank you. It coincided with a massive market crash for anybody that's familiar with what goes on in the crypto space.
Yeah.
But honestly, that didn't impact us kind of really at all. And we've now grown to, these numbers don't really mean anything without context, but I'll give you them anyway. So we've grown to 150 million of notional liquidity and around 50 million of notional traded. And what that means is it means that we're now, or Volts as a protocol is now the most liquid and the most traded interest rate swap exchange in the whole of DeFi.
Incredible, man. That's incredible. What risks are outside of being the market being so volatile as you mean in terms of like the early adoption, the innovation that's happening? Outside of that, what are some risks that your company faces as you continue to grow, scale, and improve your technology?
Yeah, so there's the way that we really think about it actually is that there's like two types of risks. There's risks that are outside of our control, and then there's risks that are inside of our control. And I guess one of the big ones, just to highlight it, that's outside of our control is ultimately the regulatory environment. And actually the US in particular has arguably been like one of the most draconian kind of environments for kind of crypto and DeFi historically. But what's actually really nice is, and you can see this in the kind of narratives coming out as politicians, both in the US and actually in the UK, is that it's quite clearly changing, right? And people are starting to recognize like the benefits of decentralized financial infrastructure and what that can mean for the world. Right. So that's changing, and that's great to see, and we want to continue to see that kind of evolve such that we can build a financial system that helps these 25% of the world's population have a bank account. Like, that's going to be an amazing thing to see. But then alongside that, like in terms of the risks that are inside our control, what's actually kind of really, in many ways, actually quite exciting about Web3 as an ecosystem is everything is open source. Like anybody can just come in and fork your code base and create a competitor with like zero effort. So you as a team and as a community, you've got to be moving at a phenomenal pace to always remain like one step ahead of whoever is coming in and just forking your code base. And it's actually one of the other benefits of DeFi is because it is open source and because it's accessible to everyone in the world, right? It actually becomes a more innovative environment relative to kind of traditional finance that's closed source, it's inaccessible. Like there's only a small proportion of the world that actually understand the way in which these things work. Like you open that up to the whole world, and the innovation that you kind of start to kind of deliver, right, as an open source ecosystem, it's just orders of magnitude kind of more advanced.
Yeah, no, I was talking to another founder who started a different type of asset class kind of exchange in terms of borrowing against NFTs. And one thing we discussed was it's incredible how the nature of blockchain and a lot of these protocols, being that they're open source, is that the users and those who are building around the blockchain can have a say in where the direction of these protocols go and where the technology goes, and it kind of brings it back down to the user because I feel as though with products and as they grow and scale, it tends to lose some kind of insight into their user base and customer base because they're making decisions on an extremely high level versus when they began in conception, it was on the ground level. But with the nature of a lot of these with crypto and blockchain in general is the fact that you can actually have a say in the way the technology is being built and growing and add to its efficacy and the ability for that product to grow and become better and an increase in its ability, accessibility, and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, it's an ecosystem that has the user at the center, right? And that is fundamentally different to the way in which traditional finance works, where it has the elite individuals, like that are able to control
those who
this
know.
source. they're at the center, right? And
Yeah.
I think putting the user at the center and giving the user control, it just completely changes the way in which this world will evolve.
Yeah, yeah. I think you touched on it already, but if you can, summarize it, is what is the long-term vision for Volts?
Yeah, so we ultimately exist as a like Volt. So we've got Volts the protocol, and you've got Volts Labs, which is like a centralized team, and we create permissionless software. But like as a team and actually as a community around the protocol, like we ultimately exist to try and democratize access to financial services, such that we can change the lives of billions of people. So that's kind of like in many ways our North Star. And that's kind of why we exist, and we'll always be focused on trying to deliver that. But in terms of actually going about that practically, like you got to kind of break that down into some kind of material milestones. And the first, which like is on the horizon for us, and this is already starting to take place, is that we want to be kind of like the rates market for the metaverse. And this is like already in many ways the case. We are the most liquid, most traded interest rate swap exchange in DeFi, but we want to keep growing that and kind of grow the ecosystem around the protocol. But then after that, the next step is there's an entity. It's actually in London. As you can tell, I'm a Londoner, or at least you can tell I'm British at the very least. But there's an entity in London called London Clearing House. It's responsible for about 90% of the world's interest rate swap clearing. And it is a legacy institution using legacy technology, operating in a way that is like, exactly the way in which traditional finance works. It's opaque, it's closed source, it's only accessible to a small number of people. And what we want to happen within the next 5 years is we want to have completely displaced that institution. We want it to no longer exist. We want all of that trading to be going through Volt as a primitive, which is like a fundamentally different primitive where it is open source, it's accessible, it's provides equitable access to everybody, and in doing so we see that as like a material step on the long-term plan for ultimately kind of creating financial freedom.
I love that, and in terms of just like the word you use, opaque, I love that because you're exactly right. There's we use this word transparency, I think, a lot within software and especially within DeFi and dApps and the whole infrastructure. But I think what you mentioned kind of really resonated with me was that it is currently opaque in terms of accessibility and how things are functioning and how the markets are changing, but putting the user at the center, like you mentioned, has this natural ability to make it transparent and create this ecosystem where you can have that access. So really excited to see where it goes, man, and where and hopefully the displacement happens sooner rather than later.
But do it in like a couple of years rather than 5 years.
I know. I always say it takes about 5 years to do something successfully because the first two are to learn, identify and grow as within your own space. The next 2 years is to adopt it and be extremely bullish with where you're headed to, and then the last years is when you reap the rewards. And that's about a 5-year time period in my mind. But I always like to ask my guests, just for my own research purposes, as well as to, broaden everyone's knowledge, what books and people influenced you the most? You mentioned you go on audiobooks, you're on podcasts, you're reading, but what's been super influential to you?
Yeah, well, I think beyond like Satoshi, which obviously no one knows who she is. Beyond they like whoever beyond Satoshi and beyond Vitalik actually as well, right? Two either kind of groups or in Vitalik's instance a person. There's just in many ways created technology that will fundamentally change the way the world works. Like beyond them, actually one that really I look back on kind of when I listen to it. Coming out of university is the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And like I'm sure that most people kind of listening to this have either read it, and if they haven't, they've at least heard of it. But if you have not read that, I feel like it is an absolute must if you're looking to build any form of like software business that's looking to scale rapidly and change the world.
I I love that. I love that. Well, that's definitely now on the reading list.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Simon. I really appreciate you going down and breaking down not only your experience